Hello and welcome to In Depth. I'm Tina Jha. More and more countries are now being impacted by climate change, with devastating consequences being felt in both rich and poor countries across the globe. As per a report released by international environment think tank Germanwatch, around 60 million people were affected by extreme weather in the year 2018. India recorded the highest number of fatalities due to climate change and the second highest monetary losses from its impact last year. In the Climate Risk Index 2020, India's rank has worsened from the 14th spot in 2017 to 5th in 2018 in the global vulnerability ladder. On the show today, we analyze the factors that make India the 5th most vulnerable country to climate change, which are the other countries most affected by extreme weather events, and what steps are being taken to deal with consequences of climate change. As per the Global Climate Risk Index, extreme weather events are massive challenges, not just for poor and vulnerable countries, but also high-income countries that are now threatened more and more by climate risks. Industrialized countries like Japan and Germany were hit the hardest by heat waves and severe drought in the year 2018, while the Philippines was hit by the most powerful typhoon recorded worldwide. In the last 2 decades, globally, nearly 5 lakh fatalities were directly linked to more than 12,000 extreme weather events, the economic damages of which amounted to approximately $3.54 trillion. India alone incurred losses worth nearly $38,000 million. India is the 5th most vulnerable country when it comes to climate change, according to the Global Climate Risk Index 2020, released by environmental think tank Germanwatch. India, in fact, fell from the 15th rank of countries hit by climate change-induced weather phenomena in 2017. The country recorded the highest number of deaths due to climate change and the second highest monetary losses in the year 2018. The report says India's increasing vulnerability is due to severe rainfall, heavy flooding and landslides that claimed hundreds of lives across the country. It says that in 2018, the southwest monsoon severely affected the country. Kerala was specially impacted, where 324 people died due to floods, the worst in 100 years. Over 220,000 people had to leave their homes, 20,000 houses and 80 dams were destroyed. The damage amounted to $2.8 billion. Furthermore, the Indian coast was hit by cyclones Titli and Gaja in October and November 2018. With wind speeds of up to 150 kilometers per hour, Cyclone Titli killed 8 people and left around 450,000 without electricity. Besides, the country also suffered from extreme heat in the year 2018. Although the human death toll was kept considerably low due to public measures, the economic damages were quite severe as per the report.
India, to my mind, becomes more vulnerable because of what I call poverty overpopulation. We are not only overpopulated, but among that overpopulated, demography, you have more poor people. So if you have more poor people in that, in the population, then they become more vulnerable. And vulnerability is a function of these two things: population versus environmental extreme. If environmental extreme is in a place where there is no human population, that extreme may come and go. That may impact other forms of life or something like that. But when these environmental extremes hit areas where there is more human population, there will be more deaths responses.
The report assessed 181 countries and quantified impacts of climate change through economic losses, losses to GDP and fatalities to arrive at a ranking. It shows that extreme weather linked with climate change is not only affecting poorer countries but also some of the world's richest countries. Japan was the worst hit in 2018, followed by the Philippines, Germany, Madagascar, and India. Sri Lanka, Kenya, Rwanda, Canada, and Fiji were also among the bottom 10 in the global vulnerability ladder. Other countries in the bottom 20 were the United States of America, Vietnam, Bangladesh, and France at 12th, 6th, 7th, and 15th places, respectively. The results reflect the increasing damage caused by heat waves that scientists say are being worsened by climate change.
While these reports lay down the kind of threat that climate change causes to these countries, there are two major kind of losses that the countries incur. One is an economic loss, the other one is a human loss. We see from the report that the economic loss is majorly on the rich countries, for obvious reason. They have high GDPs. But the human loss is skewed towards middle income and low income countries, primarily because of prevalent differential vulnerabilities and inequalities. The low and middle income countries and developing countries like ours need access to low cost finance. Finance to be used for sensitization of vulnerable communities, to look at low cost solutions.
The Climate Risk Index is based on data from the Munich Re-NatCat service, one of the largest databases on natural catastrophes. It has another set of ranking for 1999 to 2018, based on average values over a 20-year period. In the 1999 to 2018 period, Puerto Rico was the most vulnerable, followed by Myanmar, Haiti, Philippines, and Pakistan. India is ranked 17th under long-term vulnerability. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Long ago, extreme weather disparities like erratic rainfall, droughts, floods, and heat waves were blamed solely on nature. But now science has established that human-induced climate change is most at fault. India is now the 5th most climate change-affected country in the world. In fact, the increasing number of instances of extreme weather events in the country have deepened concerns about the impact of climate change on India.
For countries like India, climate change is not just an environmental concern but also the biggest developmental challenge. The world over, extreme weather is impacting the economic performance and lives of millions of people. India is potentially one of the nations that, given its huge population and poverty, could be significantly affected. By 2020, pressure on India's water, air, soil, and forests is expected to become the highest in the world. No country is immune to climate change, but India is particularly vulnerable. The Indian Meteorological Department estimates average temperatures have increased in India by 0.6 degrees Celsius between 1901 to 10 and 2009 to 18. The World Bank says climate change could push up average temperatures in India to 29.1 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, up from the current 25.1 degrees Celsius. Some parts of India are more vulnerable to climate change. Average temperatures in the last decade rose nearly 1 degree Celsius in Rajasthan, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and the Northeast compared to the historical average in the 1950 to 1980 period.
India is a unique country. India has multiple geographies as part of it. We have a over 7,000 kilometer coastline. In the north, we have this Himalayan belt. We have hot and dry region in the middle, and all these different geographies and topographies have their own way of reacting to climate change. There is more ice melt. There are more dry days in the year, and we have also seen that more and more cities on the coastline are getting affected by heavy and intense cyclones. We saw that in Kerala, we saw that in Chennai, we saw that in Odisha over the years.
Central districts are the most vulnerable to climate change because they lack infrastructure and are largely agrarian. For these districts, the World Bank suggests that GDP per capita could shrink nearly 10% by 2050 because of climate change. The Economic Survey 2018 also said climate change is taking a toll on India's agricultural productivity and farmers' incomes. Extreme temperatures and droughts shrink farmer incomes by 4 to 14% for key crops. Poorer farmers in regions with weaker infrastructure and less irrigation are the most affected. In industries like construction, high temperatures can make life miserable for workers and decrease their productivity. Climate change is also manifesting itself in the rise in extreme hot days that have temperatures exceeding 35 degrees Celsius across Indian cities. For instance, in Delhi, the number of days where temperatures have crossed 35 degrees Celsius has increased to 1,613 in this decade from 1,009 in 1959 to 1968. Other major cities like Mumbai, Bengaluru and Hyderabad have also seen similar increases. In cities, there are epicenters of economic activity. Rising temperatures increase spread of diseases and hurt productivity. A study published in the journal Energy and Environment Science revealed that climate change may even leave India without enough water to cool power plants in the near future. A link was found between rising temperatures and changing rainfall pattern on crucial tropical crops like banana. According to a study, climate change may lead to a significant decline in banana production in India. India is the world's largest cultivator and consumer of the crop. In terms of global greenhouse gas emissions, India's share remains significantly lower than those of both the US and China. While much of India's climate change crisis is a result of outside forces, there are domestic drivers as well. For instance, the country still overwhelmingly relies on coal for electricity, the emissions from which contribute significantly to climate change. Similarly, inefficient agricultural policy encourages excessive water use, which aggravates monsoon variations. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
The world's governments have come together with an ambitious agenda to transform our planet Earth by adopting the Sustainable Development Goals, which aim to ensure that no one is left behind and everyone benefits from development efforts. In that effort, India is leaving no stone unturned in realizing its commitment towards achieving these goals.
Having played an important role in shaping the Sustainable Development Goals, it is not a surprise that India's own national development goals are reflective of them. In order to fulfill the SDG agenda, the government launched many programs focused on eliminating poverty, gender inequality, climate change and resource mobilization for SDGs. There is no time to lose in implementing these programs, for India's natural ecosystems are under a lot of stress. 10% of its wildlife is threatened with extinction. Agricultural biodiversity has declined over 90% in many regions. Over half the available water bodies are polluted beyond drinking and often beyond even agricultural use. 2/3 of the land is degraded to suboptimal productivity. Air pollution in several cities is amongst the world's worst, and modern waste, including electronic and chemical waste, are being produced at rates far exceeding our capacity to recycle or manage. UN member states adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which includes 17 Sustainable Development Goals to end poverty, fight inequality and injustice, and tackle climate change by 2030. The government has time and again reiterated its commitment to realize the Sustainable Development Goals. With the highest densities of economic activity in the world and a large number of the population relying on the natural resource base for their livelihood, India is one of those nations most vulnerable to climate change. One of the most significant ways that climate change will impact India will be through its water resources. While water sustains life, it all too often wreaks havoc through devastating floods and droughts. A changing climate will only aggravate these shocks. In view of the growing climate change worry,
Prime Minister Narendra Modi-led government had on November 27th approved the negotiating stand of India at the 25th Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, scheduled to be held in Madrid, Spain from 2nd to 13th December 2019. COP25 is an important conference as countries prepare to move from pre-2020 period under the Kyoto Protocol to the post-2020 period under the Paris Agreement. India's approach will be guided by principles and provisions of UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, particularly the principles of equity and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capability, or CBDRRC.
There are concerns about common but differentiated responsibilities, and we can only do so much through our own initiatives. Technology transfer and access to finance still remain the key bottom line of tackling this thing. But climate change is around two things. It is managing the unavoidable and also avoiding the unmanageable. On the mitigation front, India has put in enough policy measures to enhance solar, its non-fossil fuel installed capacity, is putting in energy efficiency mechanisms. But on the adaptation side, there's still a long way to go. And one of the key things that we have to do as a beginning starting point, is to enhance the political visibility of adaptation.
India's leadership on climate change has been evident and well recognized across the globe. The government has undertaken several initiatives to address climate change concerns, and these initiatives reflect India's commitment and ambition towards climate action. In the recently held Climate Action Summit, convened by the United Nations Secretary General, the Prime Minister announced India's plan to scale up its renewable energy target to 450 gigawatts and called for responsible action by all on the principles of equity and CBDRRC.
The time for talking is over. The world needs to act now. We believe that an ounce of practice is worth more than a ton of preaching. हम भारत में के फ्यूल मिक्स में नॉन फॉसिल फ्यूल की हिस्सेदारी बढ़ा रहे हैं. हम 2022 तक रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी में अपनी कैपेसिटी को 175 गीगावाट तक ले जा रहे हैं और आगे हम इसे 450 गीगावाट तक ले जाने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध है.
Our Prime Minister recently at the UN Climate Action Summit launched the Coalition on Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, which is a great way forward to enhance collaboration and come out of the silo approach that we have and get the academia, the governments, the think tanks, civil societies and the industry come together to make the right kind of and the sustainable kind of choices.
In a big push towards renewable energy, India has established the International Solar Alliance along with France in 2018. The initiative to establish ISA took place at the 2015 Paris Climate Convention. The initiative reflected the need for a cohesive and robust global body which could meet the twin goals of adaptation as well as integration of energy resources along with climate change. India has also ratified the Paris Climate Agreement that seeks to limit the Earth's warming to below 2 degrees Celsius. Even though India has not agreed to cap emissions like other developing nations, Prime Minister Modi did pledge to bulk up on renewable power and reduce emissions relative to GDP by roughly a third from 2005's emissions by 2030. A large part of India's energy comes from coal, with renewables making up only 3%. The International Energy Agency says that the country is second only to China in terms of coal production and the largest importer of coal before 2020. That's why India's pledge to invest $100 billion in clean energy over the next 5 years is significant. So why is India at the forefront of climate action even though the responsibility ought to lie with the biggest polluters? Well, that's because the most affected must be willing to act first. Globally, climate action has been mitigation-centric, with most programs aimed at slowing down future global warming. However, one has to understand that mitigation is more important to developed countries, and for countries like India, the focus should be on adaptation. So, how are we adapting? With greater number of floods and droughts, there is also an increased need for interlinking of rivers, and the Modi government has always favored this. Now it must see it as going beyond water security and in the light of climate action. Another adaptive measure is genetically modified crops, which is a major component of climate-smart agriculture. Drought-resistant crops and crops that produce more on the same patch of land are the need of the hour. There is skepticism surrounding genetically modified crops, but the technology has been in use globally for over 2 decades, so India must adapt. The government's Ujjwala Yojana is also a big step in the fight against climate change, as it has replaced conventional wood-burning stoves with the more efficient gas stoves. India accounts for just 4.5% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, but is at a higher risk of flooding and high temperatures. That is why the country has a greater incentive to slow global warming. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
So that's it from us today in depth. We'll be back same time tomorrow now with a comprehensive view on some other subject. You can also watch our program online on YouTube and Twitter. And of course, you can also send in your feedback and suggestions about our program. Thank you for your time.